A question that broke my heart. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that one simple question made your chest feel empty? Not a dramatic question. Not a loud fight. Just one quiet sentence, spoken in calm English, under a normal American sky. Can you still love me if we don't vote the same way? If you're learning English right now, tired, confused, and secretly thinking about giving up, this story is for you. Because what broke my heart in America 4 weeks ago wasn't my grammar, my accent, or my vocabulary. It was something much more human. I want you to imagine this. You finally arrive in the United States. You tell yourself, this is it. New country. New life. New English. You believe that if you practice listening every day, reading slowly, speaking gently, everything will be fine. Your brain feels hopeful again. Your motivation comes back. But life doesn't test you with textbooks. It tests you with people. 4 weeks ago, I was sitting in a small living room in the US. The air was cold, dry, very different from what my body was used to. The heater was on. Outside, the sky was gray. Inside, the mood was polite, but heavy. Americans are very good at that, sounding calm while emotions are running a marathon inside. She looked at me, the woman I loved, and she asked that question. In that moment, my English listening skills were perfect. I understood every single word. And that's the painful part. When you don't understand English, you can blame the language. But when you understand too well, you have nowhere to hide. Can you still love me if we don't vote the same way? My brain did something strange. It froze. Not because I didn't know how to answer in English, I did. But because my heart didn't know which language to use. You see, when people say learning English is hard, they usually talk about pronunciation, tenses, or vocabulary. But no one warns you about this. Learning English also means learning how Americans think, disagree, and protect their beliefs. And politics in the US. It's not just opinions. It's identity. Psychology tells us something interesting here. When a belief becomes part of identity, the brain reacts to disagreement the same way it reacts to physical danger. The amygdala, your emotional alarm system, lights up. Heart rate increases. Logic goes offline. This is not weakness. This is biology. So when she asked that question, her brain wasn't asking for debate. It was asking for safety. And mine. Mine was busy remembering all the moments I almost quit learning English. Let's be honest for a second, maybe too honest. If you're watching this video, part of you feels tired. Tired of listening practice that feels fake. Tired of reading stories that don't touch real life. Tired of speaking English and feeling like a child again. I felt that same exhaustion, but in love. In my first weeks in America, I realized something uncomfortable. Climate changes the body, but culture changes the nervous system. The cold weather made my skin dry. The political conversations made my mind dry. People here talk about politics the way other cultures talk about weather. Casually. Repeatedly. As if it's safe. But safety is relative. When English learners lose motivation, it's often not because English is hard. It's because English becomes emotional. Every sentence feels like a test. Every conversation feels like judgment. That night, sitting across from her, I felt like I was in the hardest listening test of my life. Not IELTS. Not TOEFL. Something worse. Real life. My inner voice whispered in my native language, "Why is love feeling like an exam?" My English voice whispered back, "Answer carefully." And here's the strange thing. Slowness saved me. Because this channel is about slow English, I want you to notice this. When emotions are high, slow language is powerful. Speaking slowly gives your brain time to regulate. Listening slowly reduces threat. I took a breath. A long one. I didn't answer fast. I didn't try to sound smart. I said, slowly, "I don't know everything about politics here. But I know I want to understand you, not defeat you." Simple words. No advanced grammar. Just honesty. Neuroscience calls this emotional labeling. When you name your intention calmly, the brain relaxes. Conflict softens. Respect enters the room. And something shifted. Not magically. Not perfectly. But enough. If you feel like giving up on English, remember this. Language is not just for passing tests. It's for surviving conversations that matter. It's for love, misunderstanding, and second chances. That question didn't end my relationship. But it cracked something open. And sometimes, cracks are where learning really begins. 4 weeks in America. 4 weeks can feel like 4 minutes, or 4 years. In my case, 4 weeks in America felt like a quiet experiment on my nervous system, my English, and my heart, all happening at the same time. When I first arrived, I told myself something very confident, maybe a little too confident. I just need time. 4 weeks is enough to adapt. That sentence sounded reasonable in English. Life, however, does not care about reasonable sentences. Let me ask you something gently. Have you ever changed your environment, but your body didn't? Get the message? Your mind says, "I'm okay," but your sleep, your mood, your motivation quietly disagree. That was me. The first thing I noticed in America was the climate. Not just cold or hot, but dry. The air felt different in my lungs. My lips cracked. My skin reacted. Science explains this simply. Low humidity forces your body to work harder to regulate moisture, which increases physical stress. Physical stress, in turn, lowers emotional tolerance. Translation into real-life English. You get irritated faster. You get tired sooner. You lose patience with people, with yourself, with English. And then there was the rhythm of life. Americans move fast on the outside, but emotionally, many move carefully. Conversations start friendly, stay polite, but often stop before getting deep. This confused me. In my culture, depth comes early. In America, depth is earned slowly. So for 4 weeks, I was constantly adjusting. Listening not just to words, but to pauses. Reading not just messages, but silence. Speaking English, but also learning when not to speak. This is something no textbook teaches you. If you're learning English through stories. Here's a powerful truth. Your brain learns better when information is emotional and contextual. Research in cognitive psychology shows that memory retention increases when language is tied to lived experience. That means my English improved not because I studied harder, but because I lived harder. Every grocery store trip became a listening lesson. Every casual, "How are you?" became a cultural reading exercise. Every dinner conversation became speaking practice, with emotional consequences. By week 2, something unexpected happened. My English felt clearer. Not faster. Clearer. Because when you slow down in a foreign country, you start noticing patterns. Americans repeat phrases. They soften disagreement with tone. They use calm words for intense topics. For example, instead of saying, "I disagree," people say, "I see it a little differently." Same meaning. Less threat. That's not grammar. That's survival language. Emotionally, though, I was tired. 4 weeks is long enough for the excitement to fade, but too short to feel stable. Psychologists call this the culture dip. The honeymoon phase ends. Reality begins. Motivation drops. This is the exact moment many English learners quit. Not because English is impossible, but because life interrupts learning. And love. Love doesn't pause for adaptation. The woman I loved was patient, but she was also American. She had her routines, her opinions, her sense of what was normal. I was adapting to a new country, while she was living inside one. That imbalance matters. There's a concept in relationship psychology called asymmetrical adaptation. When one partner is constantly adjusting, emotional fatigue builds quietly. You don't argue. You withdraw. That's what started happening. I smiled. I listened. I answered politely in English. But inside, my motivation, for language, for connection, was leaking. Some nights, I wanted to stop practicing English completely. I told myself, what's the point? I understand the words, but not the world behind them. If that thought feels familiar to you, you're not weak. Your brain is protecting energy. Motivation is a biological resource, not a moral quality. Here's what helped me during those 4 weeks. I stopped trying to sound fluent. I focused on sounding real. Instead of complex sentences, I used simple ones. Instead of fast replies, I allowed silence. Instead of perfect pronunciation, I chose honest tone. And something strange happened again. People leaned in. In communication. Science, this is called processing fluency. When language is slower and clearer, listeners feel more comfortable. Trust increases. So while my English was simple, my connections became deeper. That included my relationship. The political differences were still there, quiet, waiting, but respect started growing underneath. Not because we agreed, but because we could breathe in. Conversations. By the end of week 4, I realized this. America didn't test my English. It tested my ability to stay human while learning it. And that lesson changed everything. When English was not the problem. There is a strange moment every language learner reaches, and no one really warns you about it. It's the moment when you understand almost everything, but still feel completely lost. That moment hit me in America, during my 3rd week. I was standing in the kitchen, listening to a conversation that had nothing to do with me, yet somehow included me emotionally. The words were clear. The sentences were simple. The accents were familiar now. My listening skills were doing their job. So why did my chest feel tight? This is where I learned an uncomfortable truth. English was no longer the problem. Most people quit learning a language when it's hard. But some people quit when it becomes emotionally complex. When language stops being an academic challenge and starts becoming a social mirror. In psychology, this is called cognitive dissonance. Your brain holds 2 truths at the same time. Truth 1. I understand English. Truth 2. I don't feel understood. That gap hurts. In America, people often say what they mean, but they don't always mean what they feel. Culture shapes expression. And when you come from a place where emotions are shared openly, this can feel like rejection. I noticed it in small moments. Someone would say, "That's interesting," with a polite smile. In my culture, that means curiosity. In American culture, it often means disagreement without conflict. No one teaches this in language apps. So there I was, understanding the words, but misreading the room. And every misreading chipped away at my confidence. Not my English confidence, my human confidence. Here's something neuroscience explains well. The brain loves predictability. When social rules are unclear, the brain stays alert. Cortisol rises. You feel tired even when nothing dramatic happens. That's why cultural misunderstanding feels exhausting. And when you're exhausted, motivation dies quietly. I started asking myself dangerous questions. If English doesn't help me connect, why keep practicing? If I can speak, but still feel distant, what's the reward? That mindset is common among intermediate learners. Not beginners. Not advanced. The middle stage is where people disappear. Because beginners blame the language. Advanced speakers understand the culture. Intermediates stand in the uncomfortable middle, aware but unskilled socially. This was also the moment when political conversations became sharper. Not loud. Sharp. Americans don't always raise their voices. They sharpen their words. They choose phrases carefully. They signal identity through language. I realized something subtle, but powerful. Political language in America is not about persuasion. It's about belonging. When someone shares an opinion, they're not asking, "Do you agree?" They're asking, "Are you one of us?" And that scared me. Because I wasn't sure where I belonged. I loved someone whose political views were shaped by this country, this climate, this history. Mine were shaped elsewhere. Different storms. Different systems. And suddenly, English became the bridge, and the battlefield. Relationship psychology says that unresolved cultural differences often surface through safe topics like politics. It's easier to debate ideas than To admit fear of losing connection. So when we disagreed, it wasn't really about policies. It was about safety. I began to notice my body's reaction. Tight shoulders. Shallow breathing. Shorter answers. That's your nervous system speaking. Here's the part that matters for you as an English learner. When your body feels unsafe, language learning slows down. The brain prioritizes survival over growth. This is not laziness. It's biology. Once I understood this, I stopped blaming myself. Instead of forcing more practice, I changed how I practiced. I started listening to real conversations without trying to respond. I read short, emotional stories instead of news. I spoke English only when I felt calm, even if that meant speaking less. This is called state-dependent learning. You learn better when your emotional state is regulated. Slow English isn't just about speed. It's about safety. One night, after a quiet disagreement, I said something simple in English. This feels heavy for me. No politics. No defense. Just feeling. The room changed. Because emotions are universal. Language just labels them. That's when I realized English was never the enemy. Misunderstanding, cultural and emotional, was. And once you see that, you stop fighting the language, and start using it to protect connection. That realization didn't solve everything. But it gave me something important back. Choice. And choice is where confidence begins. Climate, regions, and mindsets. Here is something no one tells you before you come to America. The weather is not just weather. It is personality training. You think climate only changes what people wear, how they drive, or how they complain. But after 4 weeks living inside it, I realized climate quietly trains how people think, react, and even argue, especially about politics and love. Let me slow this down for you. In my first week, I experienced sudden temperature changes that felt almost rude. Morning cold. Afternoon sun. Evening wind. My body stayed confused. Science explains this simply. When the body keeps adjusting to temperature shifts, it uses more cognitive energy. Less energy means less patience. And patience is the foundation of respect. Now imagine millions of people living like this for decades. Different regions in the US shape different emotional rhythms. Hot climates tend to produce slower movements and more expressive emotions. Cold or extreme climates often create efficiency, boundaries, and emotional control. This is not judgment. This is adaptation. Psychologists call this environmental conditioning. Over time, the nervous system adapts to survive local stressors. Climate becomes invisible, but its effects remain. When I traveled between regions, even briefly, I felt it immediately. In warmer areas, conversations lingered. People talked longer. In colder regions, conversations were polite, quick, purposeful. Not unfriendly, just contained. And politics. Politics absorbs these patterns. In places where life feels harsh, cold winters, economic pressure, fast pace, people value structure and clarity. In places where life feels softer, warmer weather, slower rhythm, people often value flexibility and expression. So when Americans disagree politically, they are often defending the environment that shaped them. This realization changed how I listened. Before, when someone expressed a strong opinion, my brain reacted emotionally. Why so intense? Why so certain? Now, I asked a different question. What kind of world trained you to think this way? That question softened everything. Because love across differences doesn't fail due to disagreement. It fails due to misunderstanding the origin of disagreement. In my relationship, I started noticing how climate showed up in small behaviors. She planned ahead. She valued predictability. She liked clear answers. These traits were not personal attacks, they were survival skills. Learned in a specific environment. And me. I was more flexible, more emotionally expressive, more comfortable with ambiguity. Not better. Just different. Relationship science explains this through attachment patterns. External stability, including environment, influences how safe people feel with uncertainty. People raised in stable systems often expect consistency. People raised in fluctuating systems learn adaptability. So when political conversations happened, we weren't just talking about policies. We were talking about comfort zones. Once I saw this, I stopped translating her words literally. I translated the climate behind them. That's advanced listening, not language advanced, but human advanced. For English learners, this is powerful. When you understand that words are shaped by environment, you stop taking everything personally. Emotional load decreases. Motivation returns. I tested this idea deliberately. Instead of responding immediately in English, I paused. I imagined the winters, the routines, the social norms that shaped her tone. Then I answered slowly. I think where we come from teaches us different fears. Simple sentence. No complex grammar. But it landed. Neuroscience supports this. When people feel seen rather than challenged, the brain releases oxytocin, the trust hormone. Trust reduces defensiveness. Conversations become safer. That safety spilled into my English practice. Suddenly, listening didn't feel like decoding attacks. Reading didn't feel like scanning for threats. Speaking didn't feel like stepping on landmines. Climate awareness gave me emotional vocabulary. And here's something important for you. If English feels exhausting, it might not be the language. It might be the emotional climate of the content you're consuming. News, politics, debates, these overload the nervous system. Stories do the opposite. That's why learning English through stories works. Stories give context. Context calms the brain. Calm brains learn faster. By the end of that week, I no longer asked, why are Americans like this? I asked, what conditions made this normal? That shift saved my relationship from becoming a debate competition. Because love doesn't need agreement. It needs translation. And sometimes, the most important translation isn't between languages, but between climates. Love meets political opinions. Love doesn't usually announce when it's about to be tested. It arrives quietly, disguised as a normal conversation, often at the worst possible time. Like when you're tired, hungry, and speaking your second language. That's exactly how it happened for me. By the third week in America, political opinions were no longer abstract ideas. They started appearing between us like invisible furniture, always there, sometimes blocking the way, sometimes just uncomfortable to walk around. It began with small comments. A headline on the phone. A joke that wasn't really a joke. A sentence that ended with, "Well, that's just how I see it." In English, those words sound soft. Emotionally, they are not. Here's the problem with love and politics. Both touch identity. When identity feels threatened, the brain doesn't listen, it prepares to defend. Neuroscience calls this identity-protective cognition. When beliefs are tied to who we are, logic becomes secondary. Evidence doesn't matter. Tone matters. Safety matters. And when you're an immigrant, or a language learner, your identity is already fragile. I noticed my English changing. Not improving, changing. My sentences became shorter. My jokes disappeared. My curiosity shrank. Not because I lacked vocabulary, but because my nervous system was conserving energy. This is what psychologists call emotional withdrawal. It's not coldness. It's protection. Love started feeling like a negotiation. I would rehearse English sentences in my head before speaking. Not to sound fluent, but to sound safe. Have you ever done that? Practiced a sentence 10 times, not for grammar, but to avoid conflict. That's when learning English stops being fun. And here's the cruel irony. From the outside, I looked calm, polite, reasonable. Inside, I was constantly translating, not just language, but values. In relationship research, this is known as hidden labor. One partner does more emotional and cognitive work to maintain harmony. Over time, resentment grows quietly. I didn't want that. So I made a risky decision. I stopped avoiding the topic. Not aggressively. Not emotionally. Slowly. Carefully. In simple English. One evening, I said, I want to understand what matters to you. Not to argue. Notice the language. No why. No but. Just intention. Communication science shows that intention statements reduce defensiveness. They signal cooperation instead of competition. She listened. She explained her views, calmly, firmly. Honestly. I listened without interrupting. I didn't prepare responses. I didn't translate into my own beliefs. I just listened. And something unexpected happened. I didn't feel attacked. Because when someone feels respected, their tone changes. When tone changes, meaning changes. When meaning changes, language becomes softer. That's when I realized something critical. Political differences hurt relationships only when respect disappears. Disagreement is not the enemy. Contempt is. The psychologist John Gottman calls contempt the strongest predictor of relationship failure. Contempt shows up as sarcasm, eye-rolling, dismissive language. Even in English, you can feel it. So I asked myself a hard question. Was I listening to respond, or listening to connect? That question changed my English practice too. I started using English as a bridge, not a weapon. Simple sentences. Neutral tone. Curious questions. What made you feel that way? When did you start thinking like this? Those questions opened stories, not debates. Stories about family. About fear. About hope. And suddenly, politics stopped being the center. Humanity took its place. For you, as an English learner, this is powerful. Because slow English works best when the goal is understanding, not winning. Research shows that when conversations shift from abstract opinions to personal narratives, empathy increases significantly. Empathy improves listening accuracy. In other words, your English listening improves when people tell stories, not arguments. That night didn't solve everything. We still disagreed. But love felt safer. Softer. Less conditional. And here's the quiet lesson I took from it. Love doesn't ask you to change your beliefs. It asks you to protect. Respect. Language is the tool you use to do that. If you're learning English through this story, remember this. You don't need perfect grammar to save connection. You need clarity, patience, and courage. Because when love meets political opinions, only one thing decides the outcome. Not who is right, but who is kind. Dinner table conflicts. If you want to see the true personality of a culture, don't watch the news. Sit at the dinner table. That's where I learned the most difficult English lessons of my life, not about vocabulary, but about restraint. In America, dinner tables look calm. Plates are neat. Voices are controlled. People pass food politely. But under that calm surface, opinions sit like loaded phones, silent, powerful, always ready to vibrate. Our dinner table was no different. It usually started well. Someone would ask, "How was your day?" Safe. Neutral. Friendly. Then came a comment. Not an argument. Just a sentence. Well, with the election coming up. And suddenly, the air changed. If you've ever been in this situation while learning English, you know the feeling. Your ears sharpen. Your shoulders tighten. Your brain switches from learning mode to defense mode. Neuroscience explains this shift clearly. When the brain senses social threat, it activates the sympathetic nervous system. Blood flows away from higher reasoning. Language processing becomes harder. That's why you forget simple words under pressure. At that dinner table, I understood everything, and yet, my English felt smaller. Not broken. Smaller. I noticed something important. No one raised their voice. No one insulted anyone. But microsignals were everywhere. Slight pauses. Tight smiles. Tone shifts. In American culture, conflict often hides behind politeness. And that's dangerous for relationships. Because when conflict is hidden, it doesn't resolve, it accumulates. Psychologists call this suppressed disagreement. It feels peaceful in the moment, but increases emotional distance over time. I felt it in my body. I ate slower. I spoke less. I nodded more than I meant to. This is a common survival strategy for immigrants and language learners. Agree outwardly. Disagree inwardly. Preserve harmony at the cost of authenticity. But harmony without honesty is fragile. One night, after dinner, I realized something uncomfortable. I wasn't just avoiding conflict. I was avoiding myself, in English. And that hurt more than disagreement. So I tried something different. The next dinner, when a political comment appeared, I didn't respond immediately. I waited. Silence at a dinner table feels loud in America. People notice. Then I said, slowly, calmly. This topic feels tense for me. No opinion. No argument. Just emotion. The table went quiet. Here's why that worked. Emotional statements activate empathy. Opinion statements activate defense. This is supported by decades of communication research. When you say, I feel uncomfortable, the brain hears vulnerability, not threat. Someone responded, oh. I didn't realize. That sentence mattered. Because awareness changes behavior more than logic ever does. The conversation shifted. The topic softened. The evening ended. Peacefully, not because we avoided politics, but because we respected emotional limits. This taught me something critical about love and English. You don't need advanced language to protect your boundaries. You need timing, tone, and honesty. For English learners, dinner tables are advanced classrooms. Fast conversations. Cultural rules. Emotional subtext. It's normal to feel overwhelmed. If you feel exhausted after social gatherings in English, it's not because you're weak. It's because your brain is multitasking at a high level: language, culture, emotion, identity. That night, I reflected quietly. I realized my relationship wasn't breaking because of political differences. It was straining because of unspoken discomfort. And unspoken discomfort grows resentment. Relationship science shows that couples who openly name tension early are more resilient than those who avoid it politely. Avoidance feels kind. Clarity is kinder. From that point on, I practiced a new kind of English. Boundary English. Simple phrases. I need a break from this topic. Can we talk about something lighter? I respect your view, and I'm not ready to discuss mine. These sentences are powerful because they are neutral. They don't attack. They don't submit. They protect. And here's the beautiful part. The more I used clear, slow, respectful English, the more relaxed everyone became. Not always immediately, but over time. Respect created space. Space created safety. Safety allowed love to breathe again. At dinner tables, love isn't tested by what you believe. It's tested by how you protect each other's nervous systems. And English, slow, simple, honest English, became my tool for that. If you're learning English through this story, remember, fluency isn't about speed. It's about control. Control of tone. Control of timing. Control of yourself. Because sometimes, saving love isn't about winning an argument. It's about knowing when to put the fork down and speak from the chest instead of the head. Respect is a language. Most people think respect is an attitude. I learned the hard way that respect is actually a language, and like any language, you can practice it, misuse it, or forget it completely. After the dinner table tension, something inside me shifted. I stopped asking, how do I explain my opinion in English? I started asking a better question. How do I express respect in English? That question changed everything. Because respect doesn't sound the same in every culture. In some places, respect is passion. In others, it's silence. In America, respect often sounds calm, measured, and emotionally regulated. And that was difficult for me. I came from a place where emotion equals honesty, where speaking strongly means you care. But in the US, strong emotion in political or personal disagreement can feel threatening, even if your words are polite. Psychology explains this through emotional display rules. Cultures train people on which emotions are acceptable to show publicly. When you break those rules, even unintentionally, people feel unsafe. I didn't know I was breaking rules. I was just being myself, in English. So I started observing carefully. When Americans disagree respectfully, they do three things almost unconsciously. They lower their voice. They slow their speech. They acknowledge the other person's perspective before stating their own. That's not weakness. That's social intelligence. I began copying that rhythm, not the opinions, just the structure. Instead of saying, I disagree, I said, I understand why you feel that way. Instead of defending immediately, I paused. Silence became part of my sentence. Neuroscience shows that pauses give the listener's brain time to process and regulate emotion. Fast replies feel aggressive. Slow replies feel thoughtful. This is why slow English is powerful beyond language learning. It creates emotional safety. Something else surprised me. The more respectfully I spoke, the more curious people became about me. Respect invites curiosity. Defensiveness invites distance. In my relationship, this was a turning point. One evening, after another sensitive conversation, she said something simple. I feel like you really listen now. That sentence hit me harder than any argument. Because listening is not passive. It's active emotional work. Relationship research confirms this. Couples who feel emotionally heard report higher satisfaction even when they disagree frequently. Agreement matters less than acknowledgement. So I practiced acknowledgement in English. I hear you. That makes sense from your experience. I don't fully agree, but I respect how you see it. These sentences don't change opinions. They change the climate of the conversation. And climate decides whether love survives. Here's something important for you as an English learner. When people say, speak confidently, they often mean, speak fast. That's wrong. Confidence in English is not speed. It's emotional control. When you speak slowly, you signal safety. When you choose simple words, you signal honesty. When you pause, you signal respect. This is supported by communication science. Listeners rate speakers as more trustworthy when their speech rate is moderate and their tone is calm, regardless of Accent. So if you worry about your accent, relax. Your tone matters more. As I practiced respect as a language, something unexpected happened inside me too. I felt calmer. Because respect goes both ways. When you offer it, your nervous system relaxes. You stop preparing for attack. You stop rehearsing arguments. Learning English stopped feeling like survival. It started feeling like connection. Again. That's when I realized this story isn't really about politics. It's about regulation, emotional regulation. Politics just exposes where regulation is weak. And love. Love depends on regulation more than agreement. When both people can stay regulated, respect flows naturally. When one person is dysregulated, language becomes sharp, defensive, dangerous. So I practiced regulating myself first, through slow English. Breathing before speaking. Naming feelings instead of opinions. Choosing curiosity over certainty. That practice saved more than my relationship. It saved my motivation to keep learning English. Because English became useful again, not for proving intelligence, but for protecting connection. If you feel stuck in your English journey, ask yourself this. Am I trying to sound smart? Or am I trying to be understood? Respect chooses the second. And once respect enters the conversation, love has a fighting chance, even across political differences. Because respect is not silence. It is the most fluent language you can learn. Marriage under pressure. Marriage in America looks simple from the outside. 2 people. 1 home. Shared plans. Clear rules. Living inside it taught me something else. Marriage here is not just about love. It is about endurance under pressure. Social, cultural, political, and emotional pressure, all at once. By the end of the 4th week, I felt that pressure. Clearly. Not explosive pressure. Quiet pressure. The kind that shows up in small moments. How decisions are made. How disagreements are paused instead of solved. How being reasonable slowly replaces being vulnerable. If you are learning English, you might recognize this feeling. When you speak, people understand you. But something still feels distant. That distance is not language. It's unshared emotional weight. Marriage amplifies that. In American culture, marriage is often treated like a partnership project. Roles are discussed. Expectations are named. Independence is protected. This is not wrong, it's practical. But practicality can sometimes leave emotions waiting outside the room. I didn't realize how much I carried until one night, after a calm conversation. I felt strangely empty. Nothing bad happened. No argument. No harsh words. Just silence. Psychology explains this phenomenon well. When couples avoid conflict too often, emotional intimacy slowly decreases. This is called emotional disengagement. It feels peaceful, but it's actually disconnection wearing a polite mask. And politics, again, became the pressure point. Not because we argued, but because we didn't. Avoiding a topic can protect the moment, but it can also freeze growth. In marriage, unresolved differences don't disappear. They go underground. I noticed myself doing something dangerous. I started editing myself. Not my English grammar, my emotions. I would feel something strongly, then translate it into something acceptable. Softer. Safer. Smaller. Over time. This creates internal tension. Relationship research shows that chronic self-silencing is linked to dissatisfaction, especially in cross-cultural marriages. I was learning English, yes. But I was also learning how easy it is to disappear politely. That scared me more than disagreement. So I asked myself a hard question. Is this marriage about comfort or growth? Growth is uncomfortable. Comfort is quiet. But love needs both. I realized that respect without expression becomes distance. And expression without respect becomes chaos. Marriage lives in the narrow space between them. So I chose the narrow space. One evening, I spoke slowly, carefully, but honestly. I feel pressure trying to be easy all the time. That sentence wasn't perfect English. But it was perfect truth. She listened. Not defensively. Not emotionally. Just present. And then she said something that surprised me. I thought giving you space was helping. That sentence changed everything. Because intention and impact are rarely the same. Marriage under pressure often fails not because people don't care, but because they misinterpret silence as strength. Communication. Science confirms this. Couples who explicitly check emotional assumptions maintain stronger bonds than those who rely on interpretation. From that night on, we made a small but powerful change. We named pressure. Not every detail. Not every opinion. Just the weight. This feels heavy. This feels sensitive. I need reassurance right now. These phrases became part of our shared language. And here's why this matters for English learners. Marriage forces you to practice functional English. Not advanced vocabulary, functional clarity. English that protects connection under stress. Slow English worked perfectly here. Because when you slow down, you hear yourself. When you hear yourself, you stay present. When you stay present, pressure loses power. I also learned something about American views on marriage. Many Americans are taught to solve problems individually first. Self-regulation is valued. But in marriage, over self-regulation can look like emotional distance. In some cultures, marriage is emotional fusion. In the US, it's emotional coordination. Neither is better. Both require learning. And learning takes humility. As pressure eased, something returned, warmth. Small jokes. Longer eye contact. Shared silence that felt safe, not empty. Politics didn't disappear. Differences remained. But marriage stopped feeling like a careful negotiation. And started feeling like a shared container again. That's the key word, container. Marriage is a container for difference. If the container is strong, difference doesn't destroy it. If it's fragile, even small disagreements feel dangerous. Language strengthens the container. Not loud language. Not clever language. Respectful, slow, human language. If you're watching this to learn English, remember this. The English you need most is not the one that wins arguments. It's the one that keeps pressure from breaking connection. Marriage doesn't survive because two people agree. It survives because two people stay emotionally present when pressure rises. And that, more than anything, is a skill you can practice, one slow sentence at a time. Children and the future. There is a moment in every serious relationship when the conversation stops being about you and starts being about someone who doesn't exist yet. That moment changes everything. For us, it happened quietly. No dramatic announcement. No planning chart on the wall. Just a simple question asked one evening, almost casually, in slow English. What kind of world would we want our kids to grow up in? That question landed differently than any political debate. Because when children enter the conversation, even imaginary ones, the brain shifts from identity defense to future protection. Psychology calls this future-oriented cognition. When people think about the next generation, empathy increases and aggression decreases. I felt it immediately. Politics stopped feeling like a battlefield. It started feeling like responsibility. In the United States, conversations about children often include politics naturally. Education systems, healthcare, safety, rights. These are not abstract ideas here. They are deeply personal. I realized that many strong political opinions are not about ideology, they are about fear. For children's futures. That insight softened my heart. Before, when I heard a firm opinion, my brain asked, do I agree? Now it asked, what are you trying to protect? That is a powerful shift, not just in relationships, but in language learning. Because when you listen for protection, instead of position, your listening skills improve. You stop waiting to respond. You start understanding. Intention. Neuroscience supports this. When the brain perceives cooperative intent, mirror neurons activate. Empathy increases. Comprehension deepens. So we talked about children. Not in detail. Not planning names or schools. Just values. Kindness. Stability. Curiosity. Respect. Notice something important here. None of those values belong to one political side. That realization was liberating. I began to see how easily political labels oversimplify complex human hopes. People vote differently, but love their children in similar ways. In cross-cultural relationships, children represent continuity. They carry pieces of both worlds. That can feel threatening, or beautiful. For me, it felt like both. I worried silently. Would my values survive here? Would my way of expressing emotion confuse them? Would English become their emotional language, not mine? These are fears many immigrants carry, but rarely say out loud. And fear, when unspoken, leaks into conversations as tension. So I practiced something new again. I named the fear, slowly. I sometimes worry about losing parts of myself in the future. That sentence wasn't about kids on the surface. But it was. She listened carefully. And she said something I didn't expect. I want our kids to know all of you. That sentence felt like a bridge. Because inclusion is the antidote to fear. Family psychology tells us that children raised in environments where difference is normalized, not hidden, develop stronger emotional intelligence. They learn flexibility, empathy, and resilience. That's when I realized something important. The real lesson for children is not what their parents believe. It's how their parents handle difference. Do they fight? Do they silence each other? Or do they stay respectful under pressure? Children don't listen to arguments. They absorb behavior. That made my English practice feel suddenly meaningful. Because every calm sentence, every respectful pause, every honest expression was not just saving a relationship, it was modeling a future. Slow English became future English. Simple phrases. Clear emotions. No sarcasm. No contempt. Research shows that children exposed to respectful disagreement develop better conflict resolution skills later in life. That's not political science, that's developmental psychology. And here's something beautiful. Thinking about children changed how we disagreed. We stopped trying to be right. We started trying to be safe. Safe doesn't mean silent. It means regulated. And regulation is learnable. For you, as an English learner, this matters deeply. When you practice English through stories like this, your brain is not just learning words. It's learning patterns of emotional safety. That's why story-based learning works so well. It activates both language centers and emotional centers. Learning becomes embodied, not mechanical. I noticed my motivation returning again. Not because my English was perfect, it wasn't. But because it mattered. English was no longer about fitting in. It was about building something lasting. Children, even imagined ones, gave meaning to effort. That's the secret many language courses miss. Motivation doesn't come from discipline alone. It comes from purpose. By connecting English to family, future, and values. Practice stopped feeling optional. It felt natural. And the political differences, they didn't disappear. But they shrank. Because they were no longer the biggest thing in the room. The future was. And the future has a way of quieting ego. When I think back on that moment now, I understand this clearly. Love grows when it stops asking, who is right? And starts asking, who are we becoming? That question doesn't need perfect grammar. It needs honesty. And if you're learning English through this story, remember, every slow sentence you practice is not just improving your listening, reading, or speaking. It's training you to build a future where difference doesn't destroy connection. And that is a language worth learning. How I practiced English daily. People often ask me, how did you practice English every day in America? They expect a clever system, an app, a schedule. The truth is simpler and harder. I practiced English inside my real life, especially when life felt uncomfortable. By week 4, I stopped separating English practice from daily living. I didn't sit down and say, now I will learn English. I said, now I will stay present. That decision changed everything. Here's the first thing I did differently. I stopped practicing English when I was emotionally flooded. Neuroscience is clear on this. When stress hormones like cortisol are high, the brain's language centers work poorly. You can repeat words, but they won't stick. That's why angry studying never works. So I practiced English only in regulated moments. Morning coffee. Quiet walks. Short conversations without pressure. I chose calm over quantity. In the morning, I listened to slow, real English, not news, not debates. Stories. Personal videos. Soft voices. My brain needed safety before information. Listening came first. I didn't try to understand everything. I listened for rhythm, intonation, emotional cues. This is called top-down listening. Your brain understands meaning before words. Then I read. Not long articles. Short paragraphs. Sometimes the same paragraph. Twice. Reading aloud quietly helped my pronunciation and breathing at the same time. That's not accidental. Breath regulates the nervous system. Then speaking, but carefully. I didn't practice speaking by talking more. I practiced by speaking true. Instead of long explanations, I used short sentences that matched my feelings. I'm tired today. This feels confusing. I need time to think. Simple English. Real emotions. This matters because language learned in emotional alignment is remembered better. Studies in psycholinguistics show that emotionally congruent language activates deeper memory pathways. So I didn't ask, is this advanced English? I asked, is this honest English? Daily life gave me endless practice opportunities. At the grocery store, I practiced listening to casual phrases. At home, I practiced naming feelings instead of opinions. In relationships, I practiced pausing before responding. Pause is a practice. Silence is not failure. It's processing. Many English learners are afraid of silence. They rush to fill it. But in American culture, a short pause signals thoughtfulness, not weakness. Learning that gave me confidence. I also practiced something called microspeaking. Instead of long conversations, I focused on small, complete exchanges. One sentence. One response. One moment of clarity. For example, can you explain that again, slowly? I don't fully understand yet. Let me think about that. These sentences protected me from overwhelm. And protection is necessary for consistency. Consistency beats intensity every time. Some days, I practiced only 10 minutes. But those 10 minutes were calm, focused, and connected to real life. Over time, that added up. I also used repetition, but meaningful repetition. If a sentence helped me emotionally, I reused it. If a phrase reduced tension, I remembered it. That's how children learn language. Through emotional utility. Not memorization. One sentence I repeated often was, I see it differently, and I respect you. That sentence became muscle memory. And here's something important. I practiced English even when I felt imperfect. I didn't wait to feel fluent. I spoke when I felt unsure, but safe. This builds something called communicative confidence. Confidence doesn't come from accuracy. It comes from survival success, realizing I spoke and the connection stayed intact. That realization is powerful. Slow English helped with this. When you speak slowly, your brain stays online. You can feel your words. You can adjust tone. You can stop if needed. Fast English feels impressive. Slow English feels sustainable. I also reflected daily, quietly. At night, I asked myself 3 questions in simple English. What felt easy today? What felt heavy? What helped me stay calm? Reflection strengthens learning consolidation. The brain organizes memory during rest. That's science. Over time, my English stopped feeling like a task. It felt like a tool. A tool for connection. A tool for respect. A tool for love under pressure. If you're watching this and feeling stuck, here's my honest advice. Don't practice English harder. Practice it gentler. Choose content that calms you. Choose sentences that protect you. Choose conversations that matter. English learned in safety stays with you. By the end of those 4 weeks, my English wasn't perfect. But it was integrated. It lived in my body, not just my head. And that's when learning becomes real. Because language isn't built by force. It's built by repetition, regulation, and relevance. And you can practice that every day, starting exactly where you are. Science behind understanding. At some point, I stopped asking, why is this so hard? I started asking a more useful question. What is actually happening inside my brain? Because when you understand the science behind misunderstanding, you stop blaming yourself, and that changes everything. Let's slow this down together. When 2 people disagree, especially about politics, the brain does not treat it like a normal conversation. It treats it like a threat. Not a physical one, but a social one, and the brain reacts almost the same way. Neuroscientists call this social threat response. When your beliefs, identity, or values feel challenged, the amygdala activates. This is the same system that reacts to danger. Heart rate increases. Breathing becomes shallow. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for logic, language, and self-control, becomes less active. Translation into simple English. You become worse at listening. You become worse at speaking clearly. You become worse at understanding intention. So when political conversations feel confusing or emotionally exhausting in English, it's not because your English is weak. It's because your brain is protecting you. This realization was a relief. It explained why sometimes I understood English perfectly, and sometimes I couldn't follow a simple sentence. The difference wasn't vocabulary. It was emotional safety. Psychology has another concept that helped me deeply, confirmation bias. The brain naturally looks for information that supports what it already believes. This happens faster under stress. So when 2 people disagree, they are not really listening to learn. They are listening to defend. This is why debates rarely change minds. And this is why love struggles when political differences appear. Understanding this science helped me stop trying to win conversations. Winning activates defense. Safety activates learning. There's also something called emotional contagion. Emotions spread between people faster than ideas. If one person is tense, the other feels it, even without words. That means tone matters more than content. In English learning, this is huge. You can say a perfect sentence with a tense tone, and it will fail. You can say a simple sentence with a calm tone, and it will connect. Research in communication science confirms this. Listeners remember emotional tone more accurately than exact words. So I started practicing tone, not just language. Lower voice. Slower pace. Longer pauses. These are not just communication techniques. They are nervous system regulation tools. Another scientific concept changed how I viewed love and disagreement: mentalization. Mentalization is the ability to see others as having independent thoughts, feelings, and histories. When mentalization is high, people disagree respectfully. When it drops, people personalize everything. Stress reduces mentalization. So when conversations became political, mentalization dropped, on both sides. We stopped seeing each other fully. Once I understood this, I became less reactive. Instead of thinking, "You're wrong," I thought, "Something feels unsafe here." That reframing saved energy. Now let's connect this to language learning directly. Studies in second language acquisition show that emotional stress significantly reduces working memory. Working memory is what you use to hold words, grammar, and meaning at the same time. That's why under pressure, your English feels worse. Not permanently. Temporarily. So the solution is not more pressure. The solution is emotional regulation. This is where slow English becomes scientifically smart. Slower speech reduces cognitive load. Simple sentences reduce memory demand. Pauses allow the brain to reset. You're not dumbing things down. You're optimizing learning conditions. Once I understood this, I stopped feeling embarrassed about speaking slowly. I saw it as neurological self-care. And something else happened. I became more compassionate, toward myself and toward her. Because science made it clear, we were not failing. We were reacting normally. That awareness changed the emotional climate of our relationship. When blame disappears, curiosity returns. Curiosity is the brain's learning mode. So instead of saying, "You don't understand me," I asked, "What feels important to you here?" That question reactivated mentalization. We became two humans. Again, not two positions. For you, as an English learner, this is powerful knowledge. When you feel stuck, tired, or unmotivated, ask yourself, am I trying to learn under stress? If yes, your brain is resisting for a reason. Learning needs safety. That's why stories work so well for language practice. Stories lower defense. They activate empathy. They bypass identity threats. Your brain learns best when it feels connected, not judged. By understanding the science behind misunderstanding, I stopped taking conflict personally. I stopped seeing English mistakes as failure. I saw them as signals. Signals that something needed to slow down. That shift gave me control again. Control not over others, but over my state. And state determines outcome. Love didn't survive our differences because we agreed. It survived because we learned how brains work under pressure. And once you understand that, respect stops being a moral demand. It becomes a biological strategy. A strategy that protects learning, connection, and love, all at the same time. Love survived with respect. There is a quiet moment after every long storm when you realize something important. You're still standing. Not because the storm disappeared, but because you learned how to stand inside it. That was the moment I reached at the end of my 4 weeks in America. The political differences were still there. The cultural gaps still existed. The accents, the habits, the instincts, still different. But love survived. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Respectfully. And that matters more. Many people believe love survives when two people think the same way. Science, experience, and real life say the opposite. Love survives when two people learn how to disagree without damaging safety. Respect did not mean silence. It did not mean pretending to agree. It meant choosing connection over ego, again and again. Looking back, I see how close we came to losing that connection. Not because of politics, but because of fear. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of losing identity. Fear of saying the wrong thing, in the wrong language, at the wrong time. Fear makes people rigid. Respect makes people flexible. And flexibility is the real secret of long-term love. In our final conversations before I left, something felt different. Not lighter, but steadier. We spoke slowly. We paused more. We checked in emotionally. Not with big speeches. With small sentences. I care about us. This is hard for me. I want to understand, not win. Those sentences became anchors. Relationship. Psychology explains this well. Couples who survive long-term stress develop shared meaning. They don't erase differences. They build a shared language around them. That's what we did. And English, slow, imperfect, human English, was the tool. I realized something deeply personal then. Learning English wasn't just helping me communicate in America. It was teaching me how to stay emotionally present under pressure. That skill is bigger than language. It's a life skill. Respect saved love not because it solved problems, but because it allowed problems to exist without destroying trust. Trust doesn't need agreement. It needs consistency. When your partner knows you will listen, even when you disagree, their nervous system relaxes. And relaxed people don't fight to survive conversations. They stay. That's the happy ending people don't talk about enough. Not fireworks. Not perfect harmony. But staying. For you, watching this to practice English. I want you to hear this clearly. You are not failing because English feels emotional. You are not weak because motivation comes and goes. You are human. Language learning is not just intellectual. It's emotional. It touches identity, confidence, and belonging. Of course it feels heavy sometimes. That doesn't mean you should quit. It means you should slow down. Use English the way we used. Respect. Not to impress. Not to dominate. But to connect. Speak slowly. Listen deeply. Choose simple words that tell the truth. Your English does not need to be perfect to be powerful. In fact, imperfect English often carries more honesty than polished arguments. That's what I learned through love. And that's why this story ends well. Not because we agreed on everything, but because we chose respect as our common language. Respect became the bridge between cultures, between beliefs, between hearts. If love can survive political differences, cultural shock, emotional pressure, and a second language, then maybe your English journey can survive frustration too. You don't need to rush. You don't need to compare. You don't need to give up. Just stay present. Stay curious. Stay kind to yourself first. Because when respect leads, love follows. And learning becomes something beautiful again. Sometimes, learning English is not about words. It's about learning how to stay calm when emotions rise. How to listen when you want to defend. How to speak slowly when your heart is full. This story was not just about love, politics, or America. It was about how real life becomes the best English teacher when you're brave enough to listen. If you felt connected to this story, if slow English helped you understand deeper meanings, then you're in the right place. On this channel, we don't rush English. We don't chase perfect grammar. We learn English through real emotions, real stories, and real growth. Subscribe now if you want to. Improve listening, reading, and speaking English naturally. Learn English slowly, clearly, and confidently. Understand American culture, relationships, and mindset through storytelling. Turn on notifications, because the next story may sound simple, but it might change how you see English and yourself. And remember this: you don't need perfect English to be understood. You only need the courage to keep listening. See you in the next story.